Okay, tape's rolling, and anytime you're ready.
Well, Dan, it's great for you to have you here with us today, and great to have you back into the Center for Nursing Scholarship. In November of 2003, you became the 25th president of the Honor Society of Nursing, Sigma Theta Tau. And during the course of the 2 years, you inspired, you motivated, you were a catalyst for action for the society, and wanted to spend some time today talking about your presidency and its significance to the organization. So you focused the society, your theme for the society was creating the future through renewal. Would you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. It was a great experience being president of this organization. And I had the opportunity actually to be on the board for 6 years prior to assuming the presidency. So in that time I went a lot of places and I heard a lot of things and I listened to what people were saying. And in the year 2002, I heard that there was quite a bit of regret and discontent among people. And it just seemed that not everyone was focusing on the positive things that nursing could offer people. And so I kind of toyed with the theme for a long time, but finally settled on create the future through renewal, because I thought that there was a great need for people to recommit to the values and beliefs that they had in terms of choosing nursing as a career, and to kind of reorient people to the renewed aspects of service. And so create the future through renewal was just the right theme, I think, for my presidency, because it was an invitation for people to do some inner soul-searching work about why they became a nurse in the first place, why the Honor Society existed, and it was a call back to them to kind of get in touch with their roots and the values and beliefs and things that they held dear about their own personal life as well as professional commitments.
You also kind of took that out further into the profession and talked about renewal in 6 different areas, self being one of them.
Right.
But there was tremendous significance in the other areas. So can you talk a little bit about those?
Well, I think what's capsulized it most for me was the foreword that I wrote for the Scholarship of Reflective Practice task force paper that I commissioned as a result of one of the outcomes of the biennium. And so I just kind of like to read that paragraph, because that to me was the essence of what it was I was hoping for people to reflect on in regards to their own personal and professional development. And so in that 2-year period, I challenged members to consider the most meaningful activities that support personal and professional renewal, because I believe that reflection is a means to that kind of renewal. And my logic went like this. As self is renewed, commitments to service come forward more easily. Renewed commitments to service require attention to mindfulness and reflective practice. Mindful, reflective practice begets questions that support inquiry. Such inquiry guides knowledge work and evidence-based caregiving. Caregiving supports society as knowledge, values, and service intersect. Knowledgeable people, and especially knowledgeable nurses, provide care that society needs, and creating a caring society is the spirit work of nursing. And so I think that really kind of summarized my belief and my vision for the society and the members. And so many of the activities were geared around those 6 areas of renewal: self, service, science, society, spirit. And I think that we did a lot in that 2-year period.
Absolutely. I think one of the other things that kind of characterized your presidency was a return to the roots, or the real reasons that this organization was founded. And I know you did a lot of prep work before your presidency, went back and read what the founders had written, and discovered some key phrases.
I did. Actually, Margie Wilson, the librarian here, the archivist, was very helpful to me as I became president-elect and provided me with a lot of information, videotapes, old minutes, old songs, the first induction ceremony. And as I began to read and review the origins of the society, I discovered that the society was originally founded on knowledge, learning, and service. But as I read through time in relationship to different historical accounts of the society, somewhere along the line, knowledge, learning, and service were sort of reframed as research, education, and practice.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a little bit different from me. I think one is more focused intra-professionally, and the other is focused in a wider frame. And so it really became a challenge to communicate the message to people that knowledge, learning, and service were much bigger and more inviting and of much greater importance than education, practice, and research, which was the troika of the day, and
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the cliche phrase that nurses were interested in. So the challenge really became, how do you integrate knowledge, learning, and service with education, practice, and research? And they're really complementary pairs, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think research is a complementary pair to knowledge development. I think education is a complementary pair to learning, and I think service is a complementary pair to practice. So it became very clear to me that we had to embrace all 6 of those dimensions and not just the 3 of education, practice, and research, or knowledge, learning, and service. And that was a major aha for me in terms of my presidency, and really did give me a very strong message to call people back to the roots and the origin of the society.
Mm-hmm.
And what amazes me most is those 6 students at Indiana University framed it in a large enough way that it could invite all kinds of activity and all kinds of specialties and invite all kinds of ongoing, timeless investment in knowledge work, in learning, and in service activities. And that was a pretty significant learning for me as I studied for the presidency, and I wanted to communicate that to the general membership.
Mm-hmm. And what did you find the response of the membership to be as you were articulating the past into the present so that we could move forward in the future?
Actually, I used the story of the founders and their knowledge, learning, and services in many of my speeches and in my inductions. And as soon as I talked about the contrast between knowledge, learning, and service, education, practice, and research, you could feel a palpable pause in the room, and people began to think about things in a different way. And actually, several people would come up to me afterwards and say, you know, I've never thought of it that way. And one woman, I was in Arizona, said, you have just given me a new way to reorganize my curriculum. And you know, it really makes more sense that it's more inviting and that it's bigger than focusing on the profession itself. It really is, has more possibilities associated with it. So I think most people were pretty responsive.
That's great. I think they were too, and I think that was evidenced by increases in membership, increases in involvement, things of that nature. As you came into the presidency, how would you characterize Sigma Theta Tau at that point in time? So in 03, November, as you're getting ready to come into it, how would you have depicted the organization then?
Well, I think it was more bureaucratic and focused on rules about how to operate than it was in terms of being fluid, flexible, and responsive. And so it had kind of organized itself through the years in a very rule-oriented way. And I think what occurred to me was that the intention behind the rules that were established sometimes wasn't being met. People were maybe complying more with the rules rather than aspiring to or figuring out how to achieve the vision. And so it had just gone through a period of restructuring after a long period of member involvement in terms of moving from 11 standing committees and a very rigid, structured, bureaucratic committee structure to a governance system that invited more participation of the members and more active involvement of the members in a fluid, flexible way. And I can remember the Four Winds campaign in terms of wanting to have just limited, simple rules and standing committees that were parsimonious, simple enough to get the governance work done, but then open enough to invite more member involvement. And so it was really a period of transition. It was a period of renewal, actually, and rebirth and reorientation from very large, rigid, rule-bound, structured organization to one that was more fluid and flexible and considering its sustainability through time and inviting member input and involvement and tapping the intellectual talent. What seemed to happen is people on the committees were the same people, and you got the same thoughts. And I can remember telling people, a group that defines itself by itself remains itself, and it never really grows or embraces the diversity that is so inherent in a membership of 128,000 people.
Exactly. Well, and in implementing that new governance paradigm, I'm sure there were a lot of challenges. And as the penultimate leader of the organization, what were some of those challenges that you encountered as we tried to streamline things and as the organization kind of went with minimalist rules and bylaws and only developed those around the areas that were precious and vital to the mission? What were some of the challenges you
Well, probably
encountered?
the biggest one, and I think the most strategic one that I saw, is that we had 128,000 members, and each of those people represented an incredible amount of intellectual capital, but there was not really a way to tap or track or engage or invite those people in a systematic way. And so the creation and the development of the volunteer interest profile, which was this electronic database of members who wanted to share their intellectual capital with the organization and then became a ready resource for the talent pool in the society, I think was a pretty significant challenge, because we had great intellectual capital, we had great social capital, but there really was not very many ways to bring people together in a collective where we could mix and match and sort and pick and choose and link. And so the creation of that volunteer interest profile, where we had a ready-made database of members, what their interests were, what they wanted to be involved in, what they had expertise in, what they were interested in learning, what they were willing to share in terms of teaching, I think was a pretty significant turning point for the organization and really invited more participation from everybody who chose to self-select into that VIP profile. And that was a campaign that I think I mounted early when I saw that there's a disconnect here between the knowledge we have in the minds of people that are out there and our ability to access and use that in a systematic and strategic way. That was one big challenge.
Yes. Well, the VIP profile continues to be a success today. You should know that that is a great legacy you've left. We doubled the registrants since the end of your presidency.
That
and
is awesome.
It is tapped into daily. So that concept, that notion you had about let's bring the intellectual capital of the members to bear on the issues before the organization was just right on. It was wonderful.
That was pretty significant insight, I think, on my part in terms of the disconnect between involvement an expectation and benefit and reward, and utilizing in a strategic way the resources that we have as an organization and our knowledge networks. I call everybody a node in the international knowledge network, and they needed to connect with another node to build this smart network of nurses that have global perspective and global talent. And I think if we could harness that in a different way, developing communities of practice of like-minded nurses that are interested in similar phenomena and could learn from each other, I think that really probably will be something that will be developed further into the future.
Well, that whole notion around communities and society and your thoughts in terms of renewal there, I think stimulated a lot of activity within the organization.
It certainly did.
And from your perspective, what do you see as happening in those areas, or that happened in those areas?
Well, I think with the opening up of the knowledge, learning, and service perspective, that really kind of reoriented our values and beliefs in terms of how is it that we provide outer service and what other kinds of communities of nurses are there in the globe that we could serve based on our knowledge capital and our social networks. And so one of the task forces that was, I think, very successful during my presidency was the Community Building Task Force that was composed of people from all over the globe, ably led by Karen Fearson. And they did just wonderful things in terms of helping us realize that nurses from around the world wanted a sense of belonging and a sense of network and access to the intellectual capital that we had in our organization. And so we struggled with different ways of building community, defining community, inviting people to engage with us in community activities and efforts, proposing different models of membership, trying to figure out how we could engage other people, creating Nursing Knowledge International, NKI, as a conduit and a portal for other people around the world to access and become a part of a different kind of community that was sort of empowered and mobilized by the Honor Society. And so I think some of that activity is continuing today, and the dialogues and the discussion about alternative forms of membership, alternative ways of creating community, I think still are probably percolating in the society.
Yes, those conversations are very much alive, and the community building task force is moving into implementation.
Oh, that's exciting.
And looking at developing some pilot communities around 6 areas of practice. So another wonderful legacy
that's a great idea.
that was stimulated by your presidency. That's great. Now you and the board of directors, your leadership colleagues, so to speak, also developed a set of expectations, anticipated outcomes, so to speak, that you hoped at the end of the 2 years the organization would have achieved under this group leadership.
Right.
And tell us about a few of those. A couple you've already mentioned.
Yes, a couple I've mentioned. And I think part of the advantage of having those anticipated outcomes early in the biennium and expecting people to work towards those just didn't come out of the blue. Those really were products of my thoughts, observation, and reflections on what had happened in the society for the previous 4 years. So I had 6 years worth of board experience to think about and link the strategic plan from every biennium and identify what was achieved, what hadn't been achieved, what was it the board of directors had hoped for, what is it that they anticipated in terms of the future. And so I was probably in a little bit better position to be a little more directive in my presidency, but it wasn't direction solely from me. It really was an assimilation and a synthesis of the strategic plans and the future initiatives, directions that I had kind of witnessed and experienced over 6-year period. So I hit the ground running with my presidency with a list of expected outcomes related to the strategic directions that the board of directors had identified, and a timeline, and also some specific examples of what we should expect in terms of products or outcomes at the end. And I also believed it was pretty important to give people a way to participate in the development of those outcomes. So I do recall working with you on 150 ways to participate in the society, and it was a matrix we developed about the 7 areas of renewal and what people could do across the 7 strategic directions that were in place at that point in time. And we filled in each one of those cells with something that an individual could commit to that would not only be meaningful to them personally, but then add to the development and the progress of the society at large. And overall, as I look back, I'm really pleased with the achievement of many of those outcomes. The Future Strategic Directions Task Force had great strategic directions and kind of reoriented itself back to the issues of knowledge, learning, service, sustainability, and communities. The Scholarship of Reflective Practice Task Force developed a resource paper on that, which is getting lots of press, I think, even in 2006. The Community Advisory Council really sort of is still up and moving. The International Leadership Institute developed a leadership statement, position paper on leadership. We had a global development task force that worked with our global advisors in a variety of ways, and so we did a lot. We did a lot in a short period of time. And I think part of that was the distillation and the crystallization of those outcomes based on my experience on the board. Had I not had the experience on the board, I'm not sure I would have been so pushy about defining those specific outcomes. But those were products of 6 years of thought in relationship to where the society had been, where it was at that point in time, and where I hoped it would go in the biennium of my presidency.
I think it was very significant. I mean, membership is obviously the core of this organization, and your attention during your presidency to the members and making their experience with the organization significant was a major, I think, accomplishment and something that was very visible that members appreciated. And I know we kept you on the road, the organization kept you on the road almost continually, but I know from those experiences you probably learned a great deal about our members and about our chapters. Can you share with us some of the learnings that you...
Wow. Well, wherever I would go, I would invariably meet people who were doing great things. And one of the other things I sort of am proud of is that I tried to align the call of the presidency with some of my editorials inside the society to the reflections on nursing leadership. And wherever I went, I identified somebody who was doing something significant, and I linked them with Jim Madden, the editor of Reflections on Leadership. And actually many of the articles that were developed during that 2-year presidency, I had personal contact based on my travels with many of the people that wrote those articles because they were doing great things, and I said, you know, this would be a great story to get into the reflections. Why don't you connect with Jim? And Jim was great to follow up with people with whom I connected him. So that was one learning. People were doing fantastic, creative, wonderful, innovative, entrepreneurial, and very service-oriented and solid work in the field. I think the other thing that I realized is that with the call to renewal, many people came up to me after my induction speeches or whatever, and she said, and would say, "Thank you for giving us permission to take care of ourselves. It is such a needed thing." And it was kind of like I had really kind of given them resources, and I had given them permission, and I had really challenged them to do the inner work and the soul searching that they needed to kind of refresh themselves so that they could stay engaged and provide better service. And it really did seem to create a discourse of hope and aspiration and affirmation and a sense of belonging and actually a little bit of, if not a lot, of caretaking for each other as well as for the society at large, as well as the communities that people were in. And people did some wonderful things in terms of organizing events to be more outward focused instead of inward focused and managing their own energy as they kind of moved along the path. So I learned some great things.
Being the president of an international organization is also, I think, quite challenging to be able to look at the diversity of membership that this organization brings. You talked about inclusivity, wanting to hear the voices from around the world of our members and the knowledge and the intellectual capital that they had. What were some of the ways that you were able to bring people together from the Asian region, from Africa, from South America, Canada, and the U.S.? What were some of the things you were able to do?
Well, one of my original thoughts was that many of the advisory councils and task forces would have co-chairs, one from North America and one from outside North America. And that worked in some instances. I wouldn't say that it was successful in all. But the kind of dialogue that took place among the people on some of the advisory councils, I'm thinking predominantly of the Chapter and Community Building Advisory Council, there were people from the United Kingdom, from South America, from Mexico, from Australia, New Zealand, they really, in the Netherlands, and they really did kind of exemplify to me what was possible in terms of global collaboration and global interest and global collectives. And quite frankly, it was really interesting for me to struggle sometimes when I went to foreign countries with the criticisms about the organization being very North American centric and not understanding actually what was involved in other countries. And it was a discovery for me to realize that in some countries, honor societies are not a part of the culture, and recognition or singling out one individual above others for academic excellence, even though that may have been a fact, was kind of a cultural taboo. So I think that there was significant learning going on, both for me, for the Honor Society, for the people that were on these committees and task forces and advisory councils. And I think that we really learned quite a bit of information from our friends in the UK and the Netherlands and Australia, where, for example, the scholarship of reflective practice is very much in vogue, and people take time out to think about what this experience in this clinical setting has meant for them, how it influences their own thinking, feeling, believing, and imagining, and how it might make a difference in their future caretaking of people in similar situations. And I think we learned a lot from those people, and I'm hoping that the reflective practice paper can stimulate some more reflection in the North American centric part of us that will be beneficial in the long run.
I think in a lot of ways you created a whole new community by being open and inclusive. This, as you mentioned, the society learned an awful lot from going out, reaching out to all its members, and certainly a couple of the committees and councils are exemplars for how things can get done by bringing together a network or a community of nurses from all over the globe, as well as non-nurses. That was another, I think, characteristic of your presidency, was to open the door not only to all the nurses that were engaged with the organization if they wanted to walk through it, but also other people, tapping into other types of expertise.
Yes, and I think that was part of the wisdom of the governance restructuring in terms of advisory councils and task force, not limiting them to organizational membership, but inviting the participation and the diversity of people who were the experts who could inform the board, and so the board could take those expert opinions and make deliberations and best choices for the organization as it plans its future.
Was there,
I need to change tape.
okay.